Hello everyone. I am going to be doing something different today. For a lot of Björk fans who I know follow my channel have probably been wondering when I'm going to be talking about Björk again. I have reviewed all of her albums already and I will link them all in the description, so there's plenty to check out if you haven't seen any of the reviews that I've made of them. And you will know I'm a longtime Björk fan. And so I had said I wanted to do a video where I discussed her B-sides and her unreleased songs, or her non-album singles. She's done actually quite a lot beyond just her 9 solo studio records. Now, I'm not going to be talking about her Sugar Cube stuff. Just because that's a whole nother thing, and to me it's a completely different genre of music, and it's not one that I'm as interested in, so I wouldn't hold your breath if you wanted me to talk about the Sugar Cubes. I've only heard the song Birthday. I've not really had much interest to look more into it. Maybe I will in the future, but this is purely going to be speaking Björk's solo work, and kind of from the mid-90s to present day. And actually, a lot of the tracks that I'm going to be talking about, if not all of them, kind of are all within a same, like, 8 to 10 year period, starting in the mid-90s to the early 2000s. Particularly around the early 2000s in her Vespertine era, a lot of the songs, I've basically ranked my favorite, and I couldn't just pick 10, I had to pick 12, my favorite of B-sides of hers, and also including non-album singles that were from soundtracks, or just one-off singles that were released for compilation records. She's got a lot scattered throughout, especially towards the beginning of her career. This video won't touch on every single unreleased track, but they're all out there. You can find them on YouTube. And I just felt like I wanted to talk about some of the ones that I felt like, especially in the top of the list, really impacted me, that I believe should have been on an album. And I want to start this trend of doing this for certain artists that I really love after I've gone through the rest of their traditional discography. Now, for anyone that is unfamiliar, a B-side is a bit of an old-fashioned music term. It's not really so relevant in this day and age. We don't really have artists releasing B-sides, although tons of artists release non-album material. But a B-side traditionally referred to a record, and how a record would have an A-side and a B-side. And a lot of times when an artist would release a single, they wouldn't just have the song on it. There would be more than the song, and a lot of the times that song would be on a B-side, so it would be a hidden track, or sometimes considered a secret track that never really got that much promotion, but it was like an extra gift to incentive for people who actually purchased a single, which was, and at the time, especially, you know, in the 80s and 90s, was like the hugest, biggest deal. That was sort of the era of the B-sides, I feel like. And there was also sometimes remixes included, and you see this sometimes in digital sales, or, you know, CDs are almost never used as singles. It'd be just silly at this point. And now it seems a little silly to release a disc with only a few songs on it. That's not an EP. But this was very common. So most of these songs were songs that were released along with big singles from some of her 90s and early 2000 hits. So I will be able to, you know, reference where they came from and how they fit in. So it's not like these tracks were necessarily like leaked without her permission. They were songs that were publicly released, but they were never on the front, if that makes any sense. They were on the back, hence the term B-side. And oftentimes these are overlooked gems, so that's what I wanted to get into here. So these are sort of in a particular order or ranking, but definitely the ones I'm more interested in are at the top of this list. I'll start with number 12. My 12th favorite Björk B-side, I guess, that I wanted to talk about on this video is Nature is Ancient / My Snare.
Then you'd offend it. It's meant to surprise. Nature is ancient, but surprises us all.
So this was a B-side for her single Bachelorette, released in 1997 off of her album Homogenic. So this is one of the Homogenic B-sides. This song, a lot of people have said should really belong on this record, but to be fair, I could see why maybe it was left out. It's very actually more futuristic for Björk, considering where she was at that time in her career in the late 90s. This song sounds like it would fit very much on some of her more recent material, and it is very beat heavy to an extent, The pulsing instrumental kind of reminds you of maybe like a newborn's heartbeat. I feel like the murkiness in the recording kind of sounds like an ultrasound. And I remember actually when I was getting into Björk first and just listening to her some music, for some reason a video with this song of like birthing like fish underwater and like like shrimp and stuff. It was very David Attenborough was one of the first things I actually watched and listened to of Björk's music, and it always kind of made me think that Björk had this weird sort of biological kind of twisted. The idea of the lyrics is nature is ancient and surprises us all. This song kind of reads as like a love letter to biology. It's much more complex and complicated, but there's something so beautiful about all of it and so hard to understand, and there's something so beautiful about how ancient it is. And so I just felt like I had to highlight this song. It's not something I really listen to much at all of all these songs I'm going to be talking about, but I think it's a good track to sort of show how her direction is changing a little bit. She's getting a little bit more into really kind of more kind of untrodden organic territory, which is something she explores a lot more in albums like Medulla, Volta, Biophilia. This song could have fit on either three of those albums beautifully. And that experimental production is actually something that almost harkens to something she would do with Arca 15 years later. So there's an interesting sort of compass needle direction being pointed for this song. And maybe it's a little bit too future facing for Homogenic, which was much more traditionally about strings, even though there was amazing organic beats built into that, synthetic beats built into that record. The next B-side I will be talking about is called Sweet, Sweet Intuition. This was a B-side off of the single for It's Oh So Quiet in 1995 off of her album Post. This is a very calm and sweet and innocent organ instrumental-led track with lyrics that if you listen to it, any Madonna fans will suddenly realize there's some familiar sounding lyrics in there, particularly towards the bridge where she sings, "And inside we're all so wet, yearning and longing." She also sings F Logic in a very triumphant and yet cute, soft way that I find to be just so alluring, and I loved when I first heard this because I do love the overall message of this song. It is very much about really giving the intuitive side of your brain and of your mind a real chance to shine and to, as she says, F Logic, and try and understand all of life and reality from a different perspective. Maybe one that she hadn't even been told to really look at for a long time and was starting to explore and understand as she was working on her Post record. So the story is that this was actually a demo, and you can, if you listen to it, it does have a very rough, unfinished quality to it. This was actually a demo that she sent to Madonna for Madonna's album Bedtime Stories, which this song ended up becoming Bedtime Story for Madonna's record, one of the singles. Now, Bedtime Story ends up sounding quite different from this song, but she does pluck a lot of the lyrics from this, particularly the one I just mentioned, as inspiration. At this point, in 1994, this was actually before Björk's album Post was released, Madonna was getting a lot of inspiration from Björk's debut record. She was really interested in it, and I can see a lot of Björk's debut record influence on Madonna's album Bedtime Stories, which only came out a year later. And then Björk comes with Post a year after that, but this song was sent way before Post was released, as she was in the process of still working on the record and sending demos out. And so they never really had any sort of, I'm not sure if they ever met in a room together beyond just maybe their team emailing each other things. I'm not entirely sure what kind of relationship Madonna and Björk have. But it was a neat sort of bridge of two worlds, as Madonna and Björk have very similar, especially in the 90s, a very similar aesthetic. And that was one of, avant-garde pop. And they were sort of the biggest female artists in like the West during the 90s. And that was, a crossover that was meant to happen. Now, I will say I like where Madonna took Bedtime Stories. It's very experimental, very psychedelic, very trippy. But it's all inspired by Björk, and of course the trippiness of the music video and all of that. So much of that album is pulling from Björk's visuals from debut. I mean, pulling from other things as well, but I thought that this was an interesting song to highlight. Also, the melody is just so captivating. Kind of, it's soft, but it gets under your skin. The next track I'm going to be talking about is a beautiful, beautiful track that Björk did not write herself, called I Remember You. This was released with Venus as a Boy as a B-side for her 1993 album debut.
I remember you. You're the one that made my dreams come true. Few kisses ago.
It sounds very similar to her song Like Someone in Love, and I can see why maybe she decided not to put both of them on the same record, as it might come across a little redundant. But this song is so melancholy and so full. You can hear the real emotion in her voice as she is singing it. It's a very, classically more romantic song singing about a loved one. But it definitely just, whenever Björk's voice gets frail, it's a unique state for her voice because her voice is usually very prominent and powerful. There's this raw emotion there. Now, this is a beautiful, sweet song that unfortunately is clouded by a very dark shadow. I actually didn't know a ton about this until I was making this video and doing some research. I had heard about her having a stalker in the 90s. One of the main reasons she ended up relocating to Spain for her album Phonogenic. But I didn't know the full story, and I have not seen the video diaries of this man, Ricardo Lopez, who was a Uruguayan man who became obsessed with Björk and, over the course of several years, formed an infatuation that led to a suicide as well as a bomb threat. So he was a very troubled individual, and a video playing of his suicide, which he documented, has this song playing in the background. And so a lot of people cannot separate Ricardo from this track, which there's a lot of, melancholic sentiment in the song itself, and the fact that, this was the last song that he was listening to when he ended his life. Apparently, he was not happy that she was dating someone else, and unbeknownst to him, actually, she had broken up with this man right before he had sent the bomb. Which of course never got to her, and it was all handled very well by authorities, but it was a truly devastating thing, and it really shook Björk to her core. I mean, how can you imagine, not just the fact that you're getting a bomb threat and you have children to think of, but the fact that someone killed themselves because of you? That's not something you want in your head at night. And I just feel for, she's not, the only, especially unfortunately, female artist to suffer from obsessive stalkers, and it is something that I can't even really fathom. Now, I know that there's actually a lot of, in recent times, outpouring of support sometimes for these troubled individuals, as mental health is an issue that is still not fully addressed to the way it should be. And we often, people are like, you're too quick to demonize. You have to remember that this man did literally, threaten to kill her, and you cannot excuse that action. I mean, it's tragic that he ended up ending his own life, but you can't negate the fact that he was extremely, extremely messed up. And I find it, I hate to say it, but I find it hard to be that sympathetic at the end of the day. Just, I mean, mental health is a huge issue, and there is true, the mind of a sociopath is not a mind of a normal person, and it's are they in their right mind, are they just mentally insane? But at the end of the day, this could have gone so badly, and so I find it hard to sympathize at all or think any sort of other way than ill about people like this. They really, especially since it's always men doing this to women, they are really kind of perpetuating this misogynistic sort of thing where it's I have this innate power because I'm male that I can control someone, who obviously I'm never going to actually meet in person, but it's this seed of that's bred in a very sort of toxic form of masculinity that will lead some men to do things like this. And I don't know if there's a cure for it entirely, but I don't really want to spin off and talk about this for too long because I've got a bunch of other songs I want to talk about, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents on that. I Remember You, beautiful, haunting track. For me, I don't want to ever see that video with the suicide. I don't want to sour the image of this song. It's not like I listen to this song very often, but I thought I definitely needed to highlight it as one of her more beautiful B-sides that she has released, although attached to a very tragic story. So the next track I'm going to talk about is a B-side off of Pagan Poetry from the Vespertine era. It's called Domestica.
Oh boy, I cannot find my key. I'm far too late.
This is a song that embodies and encapsulates, I think, the entire vibe she was going for the Vespertine album. As many may know, or may not, that her album Vespertine was actually originally going to be called Domestica. So the idea of something so mundane as, I cannot find my keys, oh, I'm looking for the remote control, oh, I wish I could get one of those key rings that I can do this whistle thing on, like all of these sort of mundane domestic thoughts running through your head. The way she decided to try and make this into some sort of transcendental acid trip that's very calming and relaxing and feels very domestic and warm and inviting is something that's quite experimental and unique for this record. So this song would have fit beautifully on the Vespertine album. And it's very mellow and soft, and Vespertine is very grand and lush. And there's these cricket sounds that actually remind me a lot of her Utopia album now. So there's actually a little bit of a through line to her most recent record. Just in sort of the way the beats that Arca uses have that organic kind of percussion that actually kind of reminds me a lot of songs like Arise in My Senses and Blissing Me. And I think that this track is just a perfect example of her being a little bit more casual in terms of, yes, the lyrics are a little bit, some might consider them a little vapid or stupid because it's like, why are you singing about this? But it's an experimental, gesture for her to try and make music that's very vibey and very much more about a specific mood rather than the most abstract poetic ballad that could be sung from the heart of some heartache or something. It's just meant to be a specific shade. It's meant to be a specific vibe and atmosphere. And kind of just pulling from all of the stuff that's around her in her environment. And I think it's a really interesting result. All right, Carvel. Now, this is a track that has this alluring, ecstatic feel to it that I was drawn into immediately when I finally checked out her Family Tree album, which was released in the early 2000s as a retrospective compilation that included some newer tracks that had not been released as of yet, along with some very early stuff of hers that were sung in Icelandic. So it's a bit of a mishmash of stuff with some remixes from her other albums. But Carvel is this pounding electro house track. It really gives EDM music today a run for its money. Graham Massey and Björk collaborating on this song. It just is so cathartic and euphoric to listen to. And it's one of the few times that, it definitely sounds like the Post era. If you listen to Post, there's actually a lot of house music influence. I talked about this in my Post review. So there's a lot of that, London's EDM scene imbued in the sound of this record. And it's so much about ecstasy. The lyrics are gibberish, as she likes to incorporate like faux Icelandic lyrics into her songs. I don't know why she does it. It's just more about the sound. It's not so much about the actual lyric. And the breakdowns that this song has, where she really lets her voice growl and the beat just becomes more punctuated. It's a perfect blend, and it definitely has a trance-like feel. Very energetic, very propulsive, with spacey psychedelia, overlay on top of it. Highly recommend checking this one out if you haven't. It's a great dose of 90s house bliss.
It's
So the song It's in Our Hands was released in 2002 for her record Björk's Greatest Hits. This was her first retrospective that she created after having 4 albums released. She filmed the video for this while she was actually pregnant with her daughter, Isadora. And this song is the perfect, I think, culmination in sound and message from where Björk's music was heading with Homogenic and now with Vespertine. I often consider this as another song that would have easily fit on that record, and I actually like to include it sometimes when I'm listening to this album, along with one other song that I will talk about. And It's in Our Hands is a celebratory call to action to do things with your life, to not feel so bogged down by reality, as a lot of the songs and messages that she's portraying in music tend to go in that direction. So beautiful, icy production that just surrounds her in such a whimsical and kind of mythical, eerie ambiance. And I find it just inexplicably gorgeous to listen to. The way that it's divided up into a bit more of a rhythmic sort of song, what could be very soft and mellow. Look no further, cruelest almost, always to ourselves. It mustn't get any better. It's in our hands, it always was. Now aren't we scaring ourselves unnecessarily? Aren't we trying too hard? Because it's always in our hands, it's always been. She gets very happy-clappy towards the end, and really just trying to get that point across. And so the song sort of shifts to being very much more about just like a proclamation of power in being present in the moment and taking control of your life.
Ég elska þig, þú veist, ég verð að fara. Ég fer og veiði í matinn, kem aftur hlaðin gjöfum, ber og fjaðrir og perlur og litla
Atlantic is another song Atlantic is a song, now I'm not entirely sure if this was actually necessarily released as a B-side or a single with any of the singles. It may have just been a bonus track that was sort of like only on certain releases. I'm not entirely sure. But this is a beautiful flute-driven track where she is singing in Icelandic, and this song is very cute. There's nothing ominous or overstated about this track. It's definitely feels folksy. It feels like if she is singing, I'm not entirely sure all of the lyrics that she is singing about in Icelandic, but it feels like she is sort of singing about some sort of very Icelandic folklore, folktale, or something about her homeland that is very special and dear to her. The flutes, I mean, you can just picture the seagulls, you know, like it's very bird-like, and also very Nintendo. A lot of people talk about how this song would sound really good in the Legend of Zelda game, and I agree. Because of the way the flute is used, this screams like, especially OG Zelda games, like their soundtracks. If you listen to them, you'll hear the similarities. This would have sounded so fitting in that universe. I just had to include it. I think it's so simple, and it might be a bit forgettable to some, but for me, this track just has this heartwarming charm about it. And that flute is just so gorgeous. Amphibian. This is a B-side off of her single Cocoon from Vespertine. This is one of the more eerie and melodic tracks that she has released off of Vespertine, or off of anything, basically. Very incomprehensible lyrics. It's more just vocalizations, very soft, delicate, and sensual, fitting the vibe of Cocoon. I can see how it's sort of like flip side of that song, even though Cocoon is so sparse. This song is a beautiful concoction of melody, of layering, of harmony, and it definitely gets soaked into your skin beautifully. I find this track just so whimsical and eerie, and it's dark and light at the same time. It's playful and it's ominous. I love the spaghetti western whistle that sort of incorporates into the melody as it adds a little bit of a spaced out, like, you know, the trippy ambiance is definitely there in most of her music, and that just helps carry that through. And the music really feels like it's threading in and out of itself, like it's weaving together into some sort of chord. All of her melodies kind of just forming one stream, if that makes any sense, that is actually moving somewhere. Even though, you know, the sound and the structure is very kind of all over the place, it's not traditional. There's a river to the melody, and I find it just something you can get lost in. So I had to highlight this track. Would have been a beautiful addition to Vespertine. That a bit. Now, a lot of people following the Utopia area will know that this is a song that Björk talks about how Arka, her producer, was very drawn to this song and another song, Ambergris March, from Drawing Restraint, several years later, to be inspired to kind of work with these ideas and sounds to create the sound of Utopia. Now, I don't hear Utopia so much in this track. I think I hear it more in songs like Domestica, some other B-sides from Vespertine, and other tracks, of course, that she's done. But I definitely still hear that subtle, offbeat, rhythmic heartbeat that I do think Arka was drawn to in her music. But for me, the beautiful swelling synthesizer work on this track is just, it literally sounds like water. And the cascade of it, the aural effect that it has, it's very one tone. And of course, it's a shorter track. You know, there's no lyrics, it's just an instrumental. And it's just a beautiful experimental track that reminds me a lot of Future Sound of London. I don't know if anyone is familiar, an electronic group from the UK. In its organic simplicity, it reminds me a lot of some of their stuff. And I could only imagine if there's possibly some inspiration there. But this kind of microbeat, layered, textured synthetic sound is something that is used as the backbone for Vespertine as a whole. So you can see how this fits into the cohesive ambiance of that record. Visur Vatnsenda Razu, I have no idea how to pronounce that, it's in Icelandic, is a B-side from Possibly Maybe in 1995 off of her album Post. This song is credited by being written by Rosa Goodman. It's not written by Björk herself, I know that. This song has a very archaic and arcane sound to it. The way she uses her voice in a much more soft and traditional way feels very religious and also very ominous. There's something just so beautiful about the soft vocal harmonies that she incorporates, and then this beautiful clarinet that takes it in a little bit more of a jazzy direction, but I don't mind it. It takes the song into something a little bit more optimistic from something quite ominous and also very serene at the same time. And this song feels like it's meant to fill, you know, a cathedral lit by candles. It just has that sort of power over you. And it's very all-encompassing in that regard. And I remember being floored by it because it's not something that's very similar to much else that she does. I mean, the only similarities would be Vokuro off of her album Medulla. There's a cover of the song that she does of a traditional Icelandic folk song, I believe. And that's the only time where she kind of reaches this sort of level of sinister kind of cathedral-esque music that is very classical. You know, Björk is very interested in classical music, and you can hear that in these arrangements. Obviously, she didn't create this song, but it's definitely something that you hear drawn through all of her music and in pieces everywhere. So I can see how this song was so important.
If living is seeing, I'm holding my breath in wonder. I wonder what happens next. A new world, a new day to see.
Okay, so I cannot make this video without talking about New World. This is the closing credits song for the one time Björk ever acted in a film the Lars von Trier film Dancer in the Dark from 2000, which I have seen, and I thought it was phenomenal, predominantly her performance. It was an amazing film. It is unfortunate that now we lot later that Björk was treated very poorly by this Danish director, Lars, as she revealed last year with the Me Too movement in solidarity for women coming out against sexual harassment in Hollywood. This was one of those really bad relationships that she had with a male in a position of power that really scarred her from the industry and made her never want to act again, which is truly tragic. But at the same time, it's fine. Björk can stick to music. That's what she does best. But she was phenomenal in this film. If you have not seen Dancer in the Dark, I know that Lars, you don't want to think about that, but still, this film is phenomenal, if anything, for Björk's performance. It is so heart-wrenching. The story, I actually saw this film 6 years ago, and I almost want to see it again, but I don't know if I will. It was just so impactful. The story about this woman trying everything for her son to save him from going blind like she did. And all the things that she ended up having to do, how it all just sort of spiraled out of control. Like the universe basically conspired against this poor woman who just wanted to do something so good and so important for her child. Breaks my heart. And so I definitely recommend you see it. The song harkens to the idea of not being able to see with your own eyes, but being able to see in a deeper sense. And the orchestral swell is just Oscar worthy. The Selma songs was the album that this is from, which is Selma is the main character that she plays. The album was nominated for the Oscars, and she did perform this song at the 2001 Academy Awards. And it has that anthemic feel. It gives you those chills, and it definitely leaves you on a note of resilience. And I can't get this song out of my mind when I think of iconic Björk songs that just so elevating and so I know it's like a soundtrack and it's very different from a lot of stuff that she actually does. It's not as experimental, but it's just there's something about matching Björk in a sort of more traditional format that, like I talked about with Visservat and Sendu Razu, that it's just so alluring. Björk can really, really go in the traditional route and create a haunting connection with the audience. She doesn't have to, be completely devoid of song structure and be all wacky and what some would consider very weird to tug at like emotional kind of vulnerability. And I think that that's what's something I miss to some extent in some of her later music that she doesn't really hearken to anymore. But I can understand. There's a charm and beauty to everything that she does with her newer stuff. But New World is just, I mean, the fact that it was released in the turn of the millennia, it just is, it's very forward facing in terms of, crossing over a mountain and seeing this vast new world in front of you. And the emotional feeling it gives is overwhelming. I'm simply walking on air halfway to heaven from here.
I am strong in his hands. I am beyond me. On my own, I am human, and I do faults.
Okay, so my favorite Björk unreleased track, and one of my favorite Björk songs of all time, is Generous Palm Stroke. Now, there are actually two versions. There is a version that I just played for you, which is the more kind of studio version, which could have been included on Vespertine, and it was sort of, again, like just a bonus track. It was never really a B-side. It was just an unreleased bonus song. And then there's a live version from the Family Tree album, which is also actually quite beautiful. It's much softer, and it's just her playing at the harp in a much more one-on-one sort of scenario. And both versions are beautiful. This track is pure esoteric sensuality. It encapsulates everything that is Vespertine. If Bad a Bid was sort of the sonic framework that was just very bare bones sonically, this song builds upon that to create these sort of euphoric, ecstatic melodies that surround and embody this record. The Eastern influences in the harp and in the instrumental, this feels so utopian. And in some ways, there are certain songs that I still feel are more utopia than anything off of her newest album, Utopia. I feel like Generous Palm Stroke is literally about utopia. Maybe not so directly in the lyrics, as it is talking more about sensual romantic love, but that is what utopia is, isn't it? You know, and so there's definitely that Arcadian beauty that is just so primal in songs like these and so mysterious, so otherworldly and enchanting. And I will always be awed by the mysticism of Vespertine. And to me, this song definitely belongs on the record. I almost can't listen to Vespertine without including Generous Palm Stroke in the track list somewhere. Because it is just such an integral part of this album and such a beautiful track that if you have not heard, do yourself a favor because you will be blown away. So there are a ton of other songs that she has released of B-sides. A lot of them are off of Homogenic, Post, and Vespertine. There are a few from some of her more recent records. But for me, these were the 12 I felt like I needed to highlight. Otherwise, this video could be hours long, and I already have made it pretty long to begin with. So I hope you have enjoyed me talking about these songs, and thank you so much for watching. And like I said, anyone who's interested, look in the description. I've got all of my Björk reviews. So if you want to see that, that's all there for you. And thank you guys again so much for watching. Peace, love, and light. Bye.